Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's kick things off with a story that proves petty revenge doesn't need to be loud to be legendary. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. How I outsmarted my drunk neighbor without saying a word. A few years back, I lived in a quiet, otherwise decent neighborhood until the day drinking disaster moved in next door. Let's call him Rick, because of course his name was Rick. Rick was the kind of guy who never met a six-pack he didn't like. He started his mornings with beer and ended his nights with whiskey, and somewhere in between, he made life a living headache for the rest of us. Now, normally I wouldn't care how someone chooses to pickle themselves on their own time, but Rick's version of harmless day drinking often came with a generous side of public nuisance. After he'd had a few too many, he'd decide to take his old sedan on scenic tours of the cul-de-sac, and by scenic, I mean completely chaotic. This guy parked everywhere. And I don't mean he occasionally nudged the curb or missed his driveway by a foot. No, Rick treated other people's property like a suggestion. One day, his car would be halfway on his lawn, the next straddling his neighbor's flower bed. Once, he parked sideways across the street, blocking traffic like it was his own private boulevard. But the piece de resistance came the day I got home from work, already fried from a long commute, and found his rust bucket sedan parked directly across my driveway. Not in front of, not slightly overlapping, fully blocking the entrance like he was guarding the damn place. That was it. I called the cops on him before, and sure, they'd had his car towed once or twice, but it never seemed to get through to him. Rick was like a boozy boomerang, chucked into trouble and coming right back like nothing happened, and towing just meant he got to go on another thrilling field trip to the impound lot, so I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. First, I grabbed my car jack and a set of furniture dollies I'd use for moving heavy stuff around the garage. With a little effort, I got the back end of Rick's car up and slid the dollies under the rear tires. The front wheels were already angled toward his driveway, probably sheer luck. So with a gentle push and a lot of grunting, I rolled the thing back across the street like a one-man valet service for the drunk and delusional. Rick's car now sat comfortably in his own driveway, something it hadn't done willingly in months. But here's where things got fun. I wasn't content with just putting it back. No, that wasn't nearly enough payback for the months of chaos and curbside nonsense, so I grabbed some scrap 2x4s and a can of black spray paint. I painted the boards so they'd blend in with the shadows under the car, then carefully placed them underneath the rear axle. The placement was crucial. They were just high enough to raise the rear tires maybe a quarter inch off the ground, just enough so the tires wouldn't get traction when he tried to drive, but low enough that it wasn't obvious at first glance. It was perfect. Rick's car now looked totally fine, just sitting there until someone tried to drive it, and then nothing. It would spin, sputter, and go nowhere. And oh boy, the show was better than Netflix. Over the next week, I watched from my living room like it was reality TV. Every afternoon around 3 p.m. prime Rick time, he'd shuffle out to his car with his usual beverage of choice in hand, toss his keys in, and fire it up. And then the confusion would begin. He'd hit the gas, hear the engine rev, but the car wouldn't move an inch. Then he'd step out, look around like he expected to find the answer in the wind, and try again. This happened day after day. One time I even saw him crawl underneath, only to come back out looking even more baffled. He probably thought the transmission was shot or that his car was cursed. Meanwhile, I'd just sip my coffee and nod like a proud prank wizard. I never said a word, never gloated, never made eye contact, just let the mystery marinate. Eventually, I moved away for work, and the whole thing faded into one of my favorite neighborhood legends. But sometimes I like to imagine Rick is still telling the story of the time his car mysteriously broke down in his own driveway for a week, only to magically fix itself later when he finally moved it and dislodged the blocks. I imagine him blaming ghosts or gremlins or cursing the car gods for their betrayal. To this day, I take great satisfaction in knowing that while I couldn't stop Rick from being the local wreck on wheels, I did manage to teach him, very subtly, that messing with my driveway came with consequences. Invisible, frustrating, and delightfully confusing consequences. Sometimes revenge doesn't need a tow truck, just a jack, some dollies, and a little creative engineering. Good on you for giving him the credit of thinking his actions had come back to haunt him. He doesn't deserve the credit, and probably never realized it was the consequences of his own actions. And our second story. She told me to be more efficient, so I broke half the kitchen. I got my first job at 16 working for a dodgy family-run business that paid me under minimum wage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I worked in the back, collecting dirty dishes, cleaning them, restocking supplies, and hauling trays up a narrow, cluttered staircase. It was basic grunt work, but I did it well and without complaint. Enter Smudge. That's not her real name, obviously, but it fits, mainly because she always had smudged mascara and the kind of expression that said, "I hate my life, so I'm going to ruin yours." She was middle-aged, constantly chipper in the most condescending way, and had a particular issue with younger female coworkers, especially me. Smudge was the queen of passive-aggressive digs. She'd praise with one hand and slap with the other. No matter how hard I worked, she'd find a reason to be on my case. It didn't matter if I was sprinting laps with dirty trays or restocking cutlery like a machine. Somehow, I was always lazy or inefficient. One hectic shift, the place was slammed. I was running around grabbing dirty dishes, stacking them on the world's flimsiest trays. It honestly felt like I was balancing piles of ceramic on plastic wrap. I'd already made multiple trips, carrying as much as I physically could, but of course Smudge saw me passing with what she deemed a pathetic load and stopped me in my tracks. "OP, you need to be more efficient," she said with that fake sweet smile. "Stack the plates and cups higher than this. You're wasting time." Then she gestured at my already overloaded tray like I insulted her ancestors. "Fine, Smudge. Challenge accepted." I grabbed a clean tray and hit the dish pit. I stacked 2 towering piles of 10 ceramic plates each, 4 chunky mugs, 4 tall latte glasses, and 7 tiny espresso cups. It took all my strength to lift it. My arms were trembling, but hey, efficiency, right? Halfway up the stairs, which were conveniently covered in rubbish because no one else bothered to clean, I stepped on a wet wipe and tripped. The tray shifted and bam, 10 plates shattered, several mugs chipped. But I picked up what I could and kept climbing because I wasn't about to get another lecture. When I told Smudge what happened, her eyes widened in panic. "Why would you stack that much?" she gasped. "Oh," I replied innocently, "I was just doing what you said." Funny enough, the next day we had a meeting about knowing your limits and working safely. Smudge didn't look me in the eye once. Honestly, for 16 and working in a shady underpaid setup, you handled it with exactly the kind of dry wit and patience most adults still don't have. Hats off. Did Smudge ever mess with you again after that? And our last story. Karen cut my job, so I let the company bleed $200K a day until they realized why. Hello, fellow Redditors. My name's Jack. I'm 61 years old, and I've spent over 3 decades writing analytical reports for oil companies. I'm going to change the company name to Pinnacle Oil for obvious reasons, but everything else here, it's exactly how it happened. I worked at Pinnacle Oil for 14 years. My job, data. And I don't mean the kind of data you glance at and forget. I tracked every measurable number from our Middle Eastern rigs, crude flow rates, sulfur content, environmental offsets, you name it. These figures fed directly into federal compliance systems and tax programs. With my monthly reports, Pinnacle Oil was consistently pulling in millions in clean energy credits, operational tax breaks, and avoided penalties. I wasn't flashy. I didn't climb the corporate ladder. I liked numbers, and I was damn good at making them talk. So imagine my surprise when last year, out of nowhere, a new department head was hired. Let's call her Karen. Karen had a different background. Marketing, I think? Came in from the East Coast wearing bright blazers, talking in buzzwords and quoting management books. Her first team meeting, she used the word synergy 4 times in the first minute. Her first order to me was simple. From now on, Jack, all reports go through me. No more sending them to the executive team directly. All right, I thought, not the end of the world. Maybe she wants to digest them first. She didn't. Not once did she open them. Within 3 weeks, I noticed the exec team wasn't even referencing key metrics during calls. The carbon offset numbers, which directly impacted federal tax credits, were flat out ignored. 2 months in, Karen called me into a glass-walled conference room with HR. "Jack," she said, smiling like she was announcing a promotion, "we're restructuring the department to be leaner and more forward-facing. These spreadsheets you've been creating, we're not really seeing how they drive business decisions." I asked if she understood what those spreadsheets actually did. She didn't respond. HR handed me an envelope. It was actually pretty generous. 5 months of paid sick leave, a year's worth of severance pay, and a requirement I had to destroy all non-essential documentation before my departure. I nodded, said nothing, and got to work. First, I silently backed everything up to a USB stick. Every report, every tax credit breakdown, every line of code I'd written for the analytics tools. Then I wiped the system clean. Not just to delete, I used a full disk encryption tool to render the drive useless. Physically removed it, smashed it with a hammer, and handed it over to IT. I then asked IT to formally remove my company email and network login. I didn't want a single thing left behind. My final act? That USB stick, neat, labeled, and loaded, I hand-delivered to Pinnacle's external audit team, who happened to be starting their quarterly review the day after my exit. No flair, just handed it over, smiled, and said, "You might find this helpful." The very next morning, I got a phone call. It was Karen. Her voice was sharp, high-pitched, on the edge of panic. "Jack, we're having a situation here. The executive board just asked for last month's environmental impact summary and the tax documentation, and we don't seem to have the files. Could you just—" "I'm on sick leave," I said calmly. "I'll call you back tomorrow." I didn't. Later, I learned that by day 3 post-Jack, the company was bleeding over $200,000 a day and lost federal credits. The auditors, they were thorough. When they opened my USB stick, they found everything with detailed notes showing which emails went unanswered and which reports were sent but never reviewed. It didn't take long to trace the root cause: Karen. Word got around that the audit summary included a not-so-subtle timeline, a timeline that showed precisely when the data stopped reaching the executive team and when the tax credits started disappearing. Karen didn't last long after that. As for me, I sat on my porch in Texas, sipping sweet tea, listening to cicadas, and watching the sun dip behind my mesquite trees. I wasn't angry. I didn't gloat. I just felt a strange sense of peace. Sometimes the value of experience isn't measured in salary. It's measured in the quiet satisfaction of letting people learn the hard way just how important you were. If Karen had even skimmed one of your reports, she might have saved herself. But instead, she learned the hard way that you don't mess with the guy who knows where all the data lives. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.